The storm raged on, unforgiving and relentless, as Officer Daniels drove down the narrow, deserted streets of Pine Hollow. It was a town long forgotten by the world, nestled deep in the woods, with streets lined by houses that had once been grand but now stood in silent decay. The rain lashed against his windshield, and the wind howled like a wounded animal, making it almost impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. But Daniels had grown accustomed to this kind of weather. After all, Pine Hollow was known for its relentless storms. The thunder echoed through the town like a drumbeat, and lightning split the sky with sharp, jagged lines, illuminating the eerie silhouettes of the trees that surrounded the town. Officer Daniels had been on the force for 25 years. He had seen just about everything, a town full of secrets, where the residents clung to their old ways, reluctant to accept change. The quiet, serene facade hid dark undercurrents. Over the years, the town had grown smaller, the younger generations leaving in search of better opportunities, leaving behind those too old, too tired, or too stubborn to leave. Daniels had always been a man of compassion. He loved this town, despite its flaws, and it broke his heart to see it slowly fall apart. He had dedicated his life to keeping its people safe, but lately, that task had become harder. With every passing year, there were fewer people to protect. But tonight, something felt off, and Daniels could feel it deep in his bones. His instincts, honed over decades, told him that something wasn't right. As his patrol car approached the outskirts of town, the houses grew more dilapidated, their windows boarded up, their once bright paint now peeling and faded. This part of town had been abandoned for years, ever since the old factory closed down and left many without jobs. Now, these homes were nothing more than hollow shells, crumbling under the weight of time and neglect. Daniels had no reason to be out here tonight. There was no one left to patrol in this part of Pine Hollow, but something had drawn him here, something he couldn't quite explain. He slowed his car as he approached a large, decrepit house at the end of the street. It had once been a beautiful Victorian home, with its grand wraparound porch and tall, arched windows. Now, it was barely standing, its roof sagging, and its windows shattered. It looked as though it might collapse at any moment. But it wasn't the house itself that caught Daniel's attention, it was the small figure he had seen darting across the yard, barely visible in the rain. He pulled the car to a stop, his heart pounding. The figure had disappeared into the shadows, but Daniels was certain it had been a child. What on earth would a child be doing out here, alone, in the middle of a storm? He grabbed his flashlight and stepped out of the car, the rain immediately soaking through his uniform. The wind whipped around him, carrying the scent of wet earth and decay. He pushed open the rusty gate that led to the house and made his way up the cracked, overgrown path. "Hello?" he called out, his voice lost in the wind. "Is anyone here?" "It's Officer Daniels, with the Pine Hollow Police Department." No answer. Just the sound of the rain pounding against the roof and the wind howling through the trees. Daniels approached the front door, which hung crookedly on its hinges, barely attached to the frame. He pushed it open with a creak and stepped inside. The air inside the house was thick with dust and mildew, and the floorboards creaked under his weight. His flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating broken furniture, torn wallpaper, and debris scattered across the floor. It was clear that no one had lived here for a long time, but then, in the corner of the room, he saw something that made his heart stop, a small, trembling figure huddled against the wall, barely visible in the dim light. It was a boy. He looked no older than 7 or 8, his body thin and frail, his clothes dirty and tattered. His hair was matted, and his face was streaked with dirt and tears. His eyes were wide with fear as he stared at Daniels, his small body shaking as though he was terrified to move. "Hey there, buddy," Daniels said softly, crouching down to the boy's level. He knew better than to approach too quickly. This child was clearly frightened. "It's okay. I'm here to help you," the boy didn't respond. He just stared at Daniels, his chest rising and falling rapidly as though he was struggling to catch his breath. Daniels kept his voice calm and steady. "My name's Officer Daniels." "What's your name?" The boy hesitated for a long moment before finally whispering, "Eli, Eli," Daniels repeated, offering a gentle smile. "That's a good name. Can you tell me what you're doing here, Eli? Are you lost?" Eli shook his head, his small fingers gripping his knees tightly. "No, I live here." Daniel's heart sank. This house had been abandoned for years. No one should have been living here, least of all a child. "You live here?" he asked gently. "By yourself?" Eli nodded, his eyes welling up with tears. "They left me," he whispered, his voice trembling. "My mom and dad thought they're gone." Daniels felt a lump form in his throat. He had heard stories like this before, families that had fallen apart, parents who had abandoned their children when they could no longer cope. But seeing this boy, so small and scared, alone in this crumbling house, made the reality of it hit him like a punch to the gut. "I'm so sorry, Eli," Daniels said softly, his heart breaking for the child in front of him. "How long have you been here by yourself?" "I don't know," Eli replied, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. "A long time that I waited for them to come back, but they never did." Daniel's mind raced. How had no one noticed this boy? How had he been surviving? He must have been scavenging for food, finding whatever scraps he could in the abandoned buildings nearby. The thought of this child, all alone in the world, filled Daniels with a sense of urgency. He needed to get Eli out of here, and fast. "Okay, Eli," Daniels said gently, extending his hand. "I'm going to take you somewhere safe, okay? You don't have to stay here anymore. I'm going to help you." Eli hesitated, his eyes filled with doubt. "You're not going to leave me too, are you?" Daniels felt his heart twist at the boy's words. "I promise, I'm not going to leave you," he said firmly. "You're not alone anymore, Eli. I'm going to make sure you're taken care of." Slowly, Eli reached out and took Daniel's hand, his small fingers gripping tightly. Daniels helped him to his feet, noticing how weak and frail the boy seemed. He hadn't eaten properly in who knows how long. Daniels guided him out of the house and toward the patrol car, shielding him from the rain as best he could. As they drove back to the station, Daniels couldn't stop thinking about Eli's story. How could someone abandon their own child like that? The thought made him sick to his stomach. He knew he had to act quickly. Eli needed food, shelter, and medical attention. But more than that, he needed love and care, something Daniels was determined to help him find. At the station, Daniels called in social services, explaining the situation to them in detail. They were shocked by Eli's story but assured Daniels that they would find him a safe place to stay. However, Daniels didn't stop there. He made it his mission to personally follow up on Eli's case, visiting him regularly to make sure he was being taken care of. Over the next few weeks, Eli was placed in a foster home with a kind couple who had been hoping to adopt a child for years. They immediately fell in love with Eli, offering him the warmth and security he had long been denied. Daniels continued to visit him often, bringing him small gifts, checking in on his progress, and making sure he knew that he was never alone. Eli's transformation was remarkable. He gained weight, his eyes regained their sparkle, and his smile became more frequent. Though the trauma of his past would always be with him, he now had a future to look forward to, a future filled with love, care, and the chance to be a child again. One evening, months after their first meeting, Eli sat with Daniels on the porch of his foster home, watching the sunset. "Thank you," Eli said softly, looking up at the man who had saved him. Daniels smiled, ruffling Eli's hair. "You don't have to thank me, Eli. You're a brave kid. I'm just glad I could help." Eli looked out at the horizon, the sun casting a warm glow over the town. "Do you think that they're ever going to come back for me?" "My parents?" Daniels paused, his heart heavy. "I don't know, Eli," he said honestly. "But what I do know is that you're safe now. And you have people who love you. That's what matters." Eli nodded, understanding the unspoken truth in Daniel's words. And for the first time in a long while, he felt at peace.